Right, thanks, Mick, for the introduction. I guess in terms of what I really love, what I'm really interested in, I guess I could add the moon to that now because I just picked up a scope during the pandemic, got an agent, Dobsonian, on adverts.ie, and during the pandemic I was out in the backyard using it quite a few nights and just fell in love with roaming the terrain of the moon and picking out lots of features. But specifically tonight, I'm going to talk about a more intriguing aspect of observing lunar features. And by amazing coincidence, the lunar X is visible tonight, except for the clouds. If maybe someone online has a clear sky out there and they could go hunting for the lunar X, maybe during the talk, after the talk, or at some stage, but it's a short-lived feature, as we'll find out. And this is, that's the lunar X there, in fact, and just up there is what you often see in the context of the lunar X mentioned of another feature called lunar V, another what they call a Clair obscure effect. Okay, this was earlier. I'll just jump on to the next slide. Oh, wait a sec. None of it is working. Oh, there it is. Nice. Okay, I guess we've all just gone to the beach, gone to the park on a sunny afternoon, just lazed about, maybe looked up at a few fair weather cumulus clouds going by and kind of pondered, said, oh, that's a bear, a castle, a plane, yeah, like just all these, like it's human, it's part of human psyche to see the familiar in the world around us. This was on a trip back from visiting my sister in Mullingar. I stopped at Blackahole one evening, and I was just, the sun was going down. I noticed the beams coming up from behind the cloud, but then the cloud itself looked quite intriguing. And again, I was seeing shapes there. You'll come across lots of terms, like specifically we're going to talk about Clair obscure. That's the term you see most mentioned with observing lunar features. It comes from an Italian word in art called chiaroscuro, or chiaroscuro, and shadow play can be another word, illusion. Lunarism, you might see bandied about now and again. It's a contrast effect between light and dark. As you get more and more into it, you come across temporism. I can't pronounce the last one. but it's, but I put that picture up on Twitter and the people replied to it, and amazingly, Chris Judge, who previously ran a Twitter feed, the account is still active, a daily cloud, but because of what's gone wrong a bit with Twitter in the last few months, because of a certain person taking it over, Chris unfortunately has stopped posting to a daily cloud, but he's on Instagram, and he produced a book with Owen Colfer last year, a kid's book about just dreamily looking up at clouds and seeing shapes. But Chris, the ultimate accolade, he tweaked my photo, and yeah, and as you can see, it's very whimsical. But the talk isn't about clouds, but well, it could be. It's about this particular feature, the so-called lunar snail. It was back in, I follow Rob Tilsley on Twitter, and Rob posted a picture at the beginning of last May, which I was absolutely amazed by, of a snail on the moon. just slithering across the lunar landscape. And it was absolutely fascinating. And that's a picture, a selfie we took of ourselves when I was driving across the south of England last September. I had made contact with Rob and we met up one evening for a chat. And but he's continued to post some amazing features he's come across. He entered one picture into the BBC Astrophotographer of the Year competition. It's a negative image of the rays around the crater Tycho, and it looks exactly like a huge moth clinging to the lunar surface. It's an absolutely amazing shot. It was shortlisted, but unfortunately wasn't even put into the exhibition of the winning photos or runners up, but it's an absolutely brilliant picture. And it's that observation of the lunar snail that kind of set me off on my own explorations of Clair obscure effects on the moon. But when we're talking about observing the moon and these effects, it's interesting to have put them in a little bit of context. So that just gives an outline of the talk itself. Early cartography efforts, actual effects, other lunarisms, other aspects of lunar observing that you could delve into, such as libration effects. And then how to find out more. I have a few books here, but there's some websites specifically on Clair obscure effects. As soon as the telescope was invented, it was only natural that they were going to point it skyward and start observing start jotting down and drawing what they could see through this new instrument that had come into their hands. Thomas Harriot in England, his lunar map predates Galileo's observations of the moon by a few months, but unfortunately Harriot's map kind of faded into obscurity. It wasn't published for about 150 years. It was eventually found in Petworth House, I think it was, where it was found and published, but it showed that Harriot had recorded features that even the modern amateur astronomer would find familiar. But it was really Galileo's Sidereus Nuncius that introduced people to the amazing landscape of the moon. Instead of bland scientific language, Galileo wrote in the vernacular, but he also wrote his descriptions of roaming the lunar landscape in the context of through the eyes of the tourist. He described wonderful valleys, mountains, so-called seas, which we now know are lava plains, and many, many other features in the same joy and glee that we would get if we landed in some new country and just saw a stunning landscape for the first time. And that's why Galileo's book did become so popular. It was because it was couched in the language of almost being a tourist guide to the sky and the moon. But it was only natural then, once we began to map the moon, that we started to name features on the moon. And the first attempts were by Michael Langrenus. Unfortunately, his nomenclature didn't last, and there's good reason for that. For example, what we now call Oceanus Procellarum, or the Ocean of Storms, he named Oceanus Philippicus after Philip IV of Spain, because he was attempting to curry favor. And that was what a lot of the early scientists used to do, to try and get patronage of wealthy royalty or others to support them in their work. For example, Galileo's discovery of the moons of Jupiter, he named the Medicean stars because the Medicean family were the wealthiest family of Florence, and he obviously, if they had a few quid that could slip his way, we'll name something in the sky after you. And the same with Langrenus. Even though Langrenus's nomenclature faded into obscurity, he still has a crater named after himself. He named one crater on the moon after himself, and it's still named after him. So he managed to get posterity there. Hevelius followed up with an extraordinary copper-plate engraved map. But his nomenclature faded into obscurity too because it was too cumbersome. Instead of the poetic names we know now, there were a lot more long-winded on Hevelius's map, so scientists didn't really use them. Now, they were used for a period of time. The Hevelius's map continued to be used and his nomenclature, but eventually it just disappeared. Oh, but it was Giovanni Recchioli, the Italian Jesuit astronomer, who introduced the nomenclature we know today. And he basically devised a system that has a very logical order, starting from the top left and working clockwise around the moon. He's named, the feature names are grouped according to era, so to speak, or time in history. So the early kind of Greek philosophers are all up in the top left quadrant. And then working your way around, you come around to his contemporaries, Copernicus, Kepler, and Grimaldi and others. So there is a logical sequence, and he introduced the poetic names of the Sea of Serenity, the Sea of Tranquility, Ocean of Storms, where allegedly Copernicus was flung because Riccioli was a Jesuit and Copernicus's Earth or sun-centered view of the universe conflicted with the Church's belief. But that seems to be a myth because, as the great lunar scientist Ewan Whittaker convincingly argued, why would they put such a prominent crater as Copernicus in that area of the moon where it really stands out? So he suggests that maybe secretly Riccioli backed Copernican theory, and he pushed Copernicus in a prominent place where its rays dominate the dark surrounds of Oceanus Coulomb. Also, by putting Copernicus there, he threw in Kepler and all the rest of them as well. So did he have a conflict with all the other scientists too? Highly unlikely. And Whittaker's theory makes more sense when you see the prominence of some of these craters compared to, because if he had a conflict with Copernican theory, he'd have just given him a small hit rather than such a prominent crater as he was allocated. And that's the nomenclature we continue to use today. It's there's a working commission of the International Astronomical Union that names features or accepts proposed names for features. Sadly, there's only 33 female lunar craters, and half of them are on the far side of the moon where they've never been seen. So, well, it was the times really, and we're not going to go and rename all the craters. And that's why the system is established as it is, and you have to make, when you make the proposals, they review them, and they, like, so say for example, around the Sea of Tranquility, deceased US astronauts, and a couple of living ones have craters named after them there. But this is the map in particular that is of interest. It was produced in 1679, 1680, and it was published by Giovanni Cassini of the Paris Observatory, and it's a quite a beautiful map. When it was presented, it absolutely bowled over all the scientists because it is quite beautiful. But here's the crater Tycho. It's almost like that lunar moth that Rob had taken the photo of, with the wings stretching outwards there. Then what's intriguing about it as well is this kind of heart shape in the Sea of the Sea of Serenity, Mare Serenitatis. It's pierced by a ray from the crater Tycho. Now, there is a lunar ray emanating from Tycho running about 2,000 kilometers across the lunar surface and right through the center of Mare Serenitatis. It's quite subtle, but it's visible. There's other intriguing features there, but the one in particular that's a real standout is the one just down on one promontory of Sinus Iridum, the Bay of Rainbows, which is a kind of semicircular inlet of Sinus Iridium, and that's kind of where we'll start off talking about these Clair obscure effects, and that's a close-up of the area I'm going to mention that was taken through the 8-inch Dobsonian just by holding up my phone to the eyepiece of the telescope, then zooming in a little bit with the phone itself. And the lighting was just right there to bring out a feature that's often called the Moon Maiden, or the Lady of the Moon. And the Moon Maiden is this one of the promontories of the Bay of Rainbows on Cassini's map. When you look at it closely, it's actually the face of a beautiful woman with long flowing tresses, which is the kind of curve of the Jura Mountains sweeping around the bay. And you can kind of see the lady there, you can see her face there. But many people were intrigued as to who that lady was, but it was only recent research by one of the astronomers at Paris Observatory who discovered that more than likely it was Cassini's wife that was being immortalized in this particular feature on the moon. And it's a declaration of his love to his wife. And it's just a lovely thought that, like, nowadays we might call it an Easter egg, but I like to think it's that declaration of love by Cassini for his wife. And you can see it anytime sunlight is beginning to flood into the Bay of Rainbows, and it's starting to illuminate the Jura Mountain range and the two promontories, Laplace promontory here. Now this is an upside down view of it because it is shot through the telescope, so it shows up. It's actually better to see it upside down through a scope. But there is another face there that sometimes appears, again, a shadow play on the moon, an effect of light and dark. And what we're seeing here is that just the peak at Laplace promontory throwing a shadow onto the lunar surface. But that I'll mention when that feature is more particularly visible during the lunar kind of lunation, I guess. Yeah. But this picture, I'll put the link up to, well, actually, I don't think I have the link to the article because it's so long a link. So I just, later in the links towards the end, I suggest just Googling star obscure effects on the moon astronomy magazine. And you'll come across an article by Phil Harrington about the lunar X and B. And there's also a lunar L down there as well. But these are the better known of the shadow play effects on the moon. They're visible around first quarter moon. Now, one thing about the lunar X is it's only visible for a few hours because of the advancing lunar day. The effect will dissipate as more and more sunlight falls on that general area. The lunar X is formed by the light appearing, or sunlight brushing the rims of three craters that abut each other. The length of each axis of the X is about 65 kilometers. The lunar V persists a bit longer because it's just a kind of small range of peaks. But the X is a very brief effect. So the times to see these are really when the moon is up and the light is just right on that particular area of the moon. Oops, sorry. This is a picture I took through the scope back in 2021. There's the X there, and the V is.
So I'm doing that so that people online, they won't see you right now.
And the V then is just down there. Again, because it's a shot through the scope, it appears upside down compared to the but this is a graphic from a website called NASA's Visualization Studio. Each year they put up a graphic showing the aspect of the moon for every hour of every day of the year. And by looking at those graphics, you can work out when these particular effects may appear. So there's lots of other shadow play effects that occur at other times, but it's around first quarter that you see the X and the V. And as it shows there on the slide, this evening was a great opportunity to see it, but defeated by cloud, unfortunately. But besides those features, there's others I'll mention a little later, but maybe to talk about that day-night dividing line. As the moon waxes from a thin crescent to first quarter to full, and then wanes from full back to last quarter, back to crescent and new moon again. That changing aspect of the moon is because as it's waxing, the sunrise is occurring gradually across the surface of the moon. More and more the moon becomes visible as it comes more and more into sunlight. They call that dividing line between day and night the terminator. And amateur astronomers, they always recommend to observe the moon along the terminator or away from full moon, because then that's when the lunar landscape looks more dramatic. The lighting effect creates these dramatic shadows in the crater floors. some craters down towards the bottom of the photo on the right. You can see one peak is catching the sun, the rising sun, but the rest of the crater's floor is in darkness. That crater could be maybe 2 kilometers deep. Then the top one where it says peak, still in sunlight casting a shadow. You can see there where the peak is, you can see a thin dark line crossing the crater floor and onto the rim of the crater itself. And that day-night line, as it moves across, it really dramatically changes the lunar landscape. This is a slide I found online where someone had made plaster of Paris models of a lunar crater. And the top left one is showing where the sun is shining from the right-hand side, casting the outer rim in sunlight, but the right-hand rim is creating a shadow on the crater floor. So it's essentially still in darkness. But as the sun's elevation increases, as the moon's age increases, or the phase increases, for that particular crater or that particular feature on the moon, the sun angle is now much higher. So you're now beginning to see less of the crater floor in darkness. It's becoming more and more illuminated until by the bottom left, at that point on the moon, the sun is more or less directly overhead, essentially, or its full moon. So the full crater floor is in daylight, in sunlight. And then as lunar night begins to fall, the sun is now shining from the left-hand side when you look at the bottom right photo, and the shadows are cast in the opposite direction. And eventually night will overtake that area of the moon completely, and it'll be plunged into a 2-week-long darkness period before it comes back and the cycle begins new again. The shadow moves about 15.5 kilometers an hour across the lunar surface. They say an astronaut could outrun it. If they had enough on them to keep jogging all day long, to keep ahead of the shadow. And of course, it's difficult running in a bulky spacesuit, so it's practically you couldn't really outrun it. But in theory, the likes of, who was that guy that used to win? Usain Bolt. He'd lost the moon about 2 or 3 times before. That'd be like that famous Muhammad Ali, I'm in bed before the light goes out, and someone said, "Oh, just get a bedside lamp." But certainly that changing aspect, even in binoculars, you've noticed after a few hours, if you look along the terminator line when the moon is a crescent, or maybe halfway between crescent and first quarter, you will notice some features beginning to appear into daylight. But through a telescope, it's much more obvious. Studying lunar features through high magnification or even medium magnification in the telescope, you'll notice after a few hours a dramatic change. And again, that's why the lunar X is only briefly visible, because after only a few hours, that area will be more in sunlight, so the effect is kind of gone then. Plotting of the visibility of Clair obscure effects, you often see mention of a thing called the selenographic longitude, or the core longitude. And it's essentially lunar latitude and longitude system, very similar to what it is on the Earth, but with one caveat. The same face of the moon is turned towards us all the time because the moon is tidally locked to the Earth, whereas the Earth is spinning. And for us on Earth, we've got the prime meridian, the 0 degrees longitude. I'll take that off. It might be easier to do. We've got 0 degrees longitude, which passes through Greenwich, and we measure everything west of Greenwich. So you have like Dublin, 6¼ degrees west of Greenwich. Then you come to across the Atlantic, you go through the US, and eventually you come to what we know as the international date line, 180 degrees, essentially the opposite side of the globe to Greenwich. And then instead of carrying on from 180, 190, 200, 210, the system starts going backwards, 180, 170, 160. But in this case, we say they're east of Greenwich rather than west of Greenwich. On the moon, that's different. It's got a prime meridian as well, a 0 degrees longitude line. And we essentially say that the co-longitude wraps the whole way around the moon. Essentially, it's tied to the lunar phase. So when the moon is first quarter, the day-night dividing line lies on the prime meridian. So we say the co-longitude is 0 degrees. When the moon is full, the day-night dividing line, the termination is moved right over here. So essentially, that's co-longitude 90. Then when it wraps around to the far side of the moon, that's co-longitude 180, comes back around again, co-longitude 270, and then back to 0. So it's numbered the whole way around the moon's disk rather than it reaching the so-called dateline and then going in revert like it does on Earth. But so essentially, if you imagine first quarter moon, you're standing on the 0 degree longitude of the moon. The sun is over on your eastern horizon, and this is like we essentially see that just the right-hand side of the lunar disk there. So first quarter moon is co-longitude 0, full moon is co-longitude 90, last quarter is co-longitude 270, and new moon is co-longitude 360 or 0. And various pieces of software you might come across, like Virtual Moon Atlas or Gary Nugent's Lunar Phase Pro, when you plug in the visibility of certain lunar features, it will return a value in co-longitude. Essentially, it uses that to determine the visibility of the feature, because there's no point in it saying, oh, the lunar X is visible tonight, or it might say the lunar X is visible at 3 a.m. But we'll never see it because the lunar X is visible around first quarter moon. The first quarter moon is never up at 3 a.m. in the morning. So we won't see it from here. US observers will probably see it, but we won't see it from here. So when you're determining the visibility of certain clair-obscur effects, you have to take into account the lunar phase and whether it's above our horizon at the time it occurs. Let's see. There. And this is an example of the core longitude of some of the prominent features, Mare Crisium, Mare Vicorum, it's 0 degrees because it's on the meridian there. Yeah, Copernicus, 20 degrees west, 38 degrees west. But this is a graphic that's on Sky at Night's website, and again, the magazine website, again, the core longitude, the Cassini's Moon Maiden, the lunar X and V, it's mentioned there. Well, the lunar V is there. The so-called eyes of Clavius, another intriguing feature. One I accidentally found, but it was only by reading afterwards I found out about it. The Jura Mountains, when you can see the Moon Maiden 3 days after first quarter moon. And this is another effect called the golden handle, it's sometimes called as well. Again, a photo through the scope 2 years ago. One of the more famous lunarisms is Grutenhausen's lunar city, the 19th century observer Baron Franz von Gruthausen. He was only using a small telescope, but he said that he had discovered an abandoned city on the moon. He even named it, he called it Valberg. And he wrote an entire book all about why the inhabitants might have abandoned the city. And he described this fantastic skyscraper-like structures with straight streets. And it's really because this area, it's just north of the 32-kilometer diameter crater Schroeter, and the area has almost like a herringbone pattern, so it does appear quite regular in a small telescope. He was much derided after the publication of his book, naturally, because observers with far more powerful telescopes looked at the area and they couldn't see anything at all there. Gruthausen championed this idea. It's become a favorite of observers. It's in an area of the moon that's quite an ancient terrain. But the Gruthausen, he had a few, like he was an excellent astronomer, but he had some really outlandish ideas. One of his other ones was the ashen light of Venus, kind of like an air glow in the Venusian, on the night side of the Venusian atmosphere, where a bit like earthshine on Earth, or earthshine on the moon. He believed that the ashen light was caused by fires lit in celebration by Venusians to celebrate the crowning of the new emperor. Again, it's a theory that sank without trace. We now know that Venus definitely had no emperor in the past, and despite what Gruthausen said, but he had some ideas ahead of their time. For example, he proposed a meteorite impact origin for lunar craters, which is now accepted, whereas many people, even into the 1960s, believed the lunar craters have a volcanic origin. And some of the thoughts where Kevin Burrick has written before, I think it might have been in the Society for Popular Astronomy's magazine, an issue many years ago. He wrote about Gruthausen's lunar city, and like a fine article about the subject. And then I mentioned the eyes of Clavius. like it really does look like someone on the right-hand photo there. It really looks like someone lurking in the depths of the crater. Clavius peering back at you, and
Some of us saw them. Some of us saw them.
or the eyes of Clavius.
Yes, we're up near Johnny Fox's.
Okay.
And I just couldn't believe it. There they were.
Yeah, and the same with me. I just looked one particular evening at the moon and was amazed to see them just peering back at me. And I took a video of them, so that's the still from the video. But it is a fascinating area. Clavius is a huge crater. It's about 220 kilometers across. And these smaller craters, if you call 28 and 20 odd kilometers across small, but they're just catching the sunlight. The top wings of them are catching the sunlight, while the rest of Clavius is completely in darkness.
It must be very deep crater.
Yes, yeah. I'm not sure the exact depth of it, but yeah.
It's where the famous spaceship sea is in James World Space Odyssey as well.
Oh yes,
Clavius as well, to a big extent, it seems to makes all the sympathy when they land in Clavius Crater. There's the one that things that deep enough craters to build the moon base there.
yes, and it's a good comment, Alan, because the future moon bases, they are looking at the lunar south pole, being where to site them, because the really deep craters there, they never get sunlight, because the moon, like Earth, is tipped to 23.5 degrees on its axis, but I think it's like the moon is no axial tilt at all.
Right, yeah. But it'll also be where I suppose a lot of water will have remained frozen and accumulated in these very deep ones, so it'll be a very good source of
like to break it into hydrogen and oxygen.
exactly, yeah. And apparently the rims are constantly in light because they're so high, and that's where they put the your
tunnels,
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So there's perfect, and of course future, some missions in the next couple of years are targeting whole craters at the South Pole, including the Artemis lander.
That's right. Also, they're saying because the temperature doesn't go way up or way down, they can deal with very, very cold or very, very hot. It's when to deal with
constant
extremes. So to be a good place for them.
I know it's been quite dramatic to name it Tom Queen Lunar Base, maybe, or something like that. We could get the proposal in now. But another interesting feature is what's called the straight wall, which really isn't a wall at all. It's a kind of rift on the lunar surface that under different lighting can appear quite dramatic, or else very much kind of merge with the background lit surrounding area. But when the lighting really is quite dramatic on it, it takes on what's sometimes called the sword handle, or the sword. So you have the long bladed sword, and then just to the upper top of the long kind of blade, you have the hilt of the sword. So it's quite a dramatic. And then that crater to the right of it in the image is called Burt. I was looking at that area one night and was amazed that the scene was really rock steady, and like I put in the highest power eyepiece on the scope and got some amazing views of the surrounding terrain. I spent a couple of hours just in that area alone, and that's the beauty of lunar observing. You can, every time you visit the moon, you find something new.
What's the association with Huygens? How's the sort called?
I'm not sure, actually. Good
It's also
question.
a phase mathematician, not as a phase mathematician, and all that.
Yeah,
Kind of stuff, to help not to lose versus something.
yeah, yeah.
Anytime I see a photograph, I always think it's a guy whistling. It's two eyes either side of the nose. Not just. Sorry, suppose we all see what we've got.
Yes, and it's not like cow.
Yeah.
Because I showed someone a picture of like a cloud shaped like a rabbit, but they said, "Oh, a mermaid." I can't think mermaid there, but yeah, everyone sees stuff differently. Well, and certainly ones I kind of stumbled across myself, but I'm not sure if they have been. Well, certainly the one on the left was mentioned to me by Andy Sawyer, who was chairperson of the Flamsteed Society at one point. He replied on a tweet I'd made, "Had I ever seen the lunar duck?" The one on the left, and that's really amazing. And then one night I was looking at around Tycho and I said, "Gosh, the creepy monster." Again, I don't know if someone has, I haven't gone into a lot of research as to whether it's been seen before.
Jimmy Dodgers.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And then the bottom right, it kind of, I just thought it kind of looked like the Loch Ness monster, but this is a shadow, like down there, like it just kind of looked like the long neck of Loch Ness monster. But what more intrigued me there was, I think it was maybe there where a shadow seemed to be going the opposite direction into the way it should have been going. And I was just amazed by that. But again, it's just a lighting effect on the moon, giving that appearance. And there's the website hosted by Charles Wood. It's a wiki space on the moon. He has a page listing lots of these other ones that various observers have stumbled across. But then Rob stumbled across that lunar snail, and I've never seen mention of it anywhere before. And that brings us on to the lunar snail. Again, another photo of it that Rob took just up in this area here. It's basically a 28-kilometer diameter crater called Frascatorius D. Frascatorius was Polish astronomer, lots of, like he had his finger in a lot of pies, so to speak. And one of his poems is about a young shepherd boy called Syphilis, who insults the god Apollo. And he's basically struck down by a terrible disease, and hence how that association with Frascatorius is like he was a doctor and a medic as well. But Frascatorius is it's a heavily eroded crater. It's like the part of its rim is heavily eroded. This picture is Pete Lawrence's from Sky at Night magazine. It's on the southern edge of Mare Nectaris, feature that was formed early in the moon's history. One of the eras in the moon's history is called the Nectarian period, about 3.9 billion years ago. So it is amongst the oldest areas of the moon. The bright crater Ross, named after the third Earl of Ross, was about 12 kilometers in diameter, but it was quite small. It's quite prominent because it's bright against the darker surrounding floor. Nectaris itself is crisscrossed by various rills because the weight of the lava basically caused the floor to slump and crack, so the rills formed because of that. And this is an area of the moon where, crater would have formed, and then another crater formed on top of that. So essentially for every one crater that formed, it was eventually obliterated. So there's many areas here where you see craters overlapping on each other. And certainly, Frascatorius itself is, I think it's 80 kilometers, no, maybe 60 kilometers across or thereabouts. But it's quite an interesting area of the moon, and certainly all the more intriguing since Rob discovered the lunar snail. It was visible last month. I completely forgot about it. The 26th of January, I think it was visible. But I checked the NASA's visualization studio and found that our next opportunity to see it is on the 26th of March. And that's a kind of zoom in on a cropped version of the visualization studio, so you can see the rim there illuminated and kind of the shell of the snail and the snail's head. So if it's clear that evening, definitely have a look out for it. It's really a lovely feature, I'd say, to see in person, so to speak, through a scope. I mentioned libration at the start. This is a graphic showing the changing aspect of the moon over the course of the month, where it appears to nod back and forward on its axis. If anyone has been looking at the moon when it was visible, even with the naked eye, they'd notice that circular feature on the right-hand edge is called Mare Crisium, the Sea of Crisis. And when libration is more favorable for the left edge of the moon, it pushes Mare Crisium towards the right edge, and that's what its appearance at the moment. It's very close to the right edge of the moon, so it's more indistinct. Whereas when libration is more favorable on the right-hand side of the moon, Mare Crisium really stands out. It's very noticeable. You can see the kind of oval of the feature. Libration is an effect, it's not a physical effect of the moon, not of the moon rocking back and forward. It's really an effect because of the moon's orbit is inclined to the Earth's equator. So the moon, passes, when it's orbiting the Earth, it can be essentially north of the celestial equator or south of the celestial equator. And that's an opportunity to see what we call libration in latitude, essentially, where we see a bit more under the moon when it's above the celestial equator. We're essentially seeing a bit beyond the bottom edge of the moon. When it's below the celestial equator, for us in the northern hemisphere, we're seeing a bit over the top edge of the moon, or the north polar regions of the moon. And then libration and longitude is because the moon's orbit is not perfectly circular around the Earth, so it appears to lag a bit, in which case we see more around one edge than the other, or other times it appears to be, well, it is orbiting faster, so we see over another edge in a combination. And then there's what's called the diurnal libration. As the moon is coming up, we're essentially seeing a little more over that particular edge that's beginning to appear. And then when the moon is setting in the west, we're seeing a bit more, like essentially it's like being on top of a hill, looking down a bit beyond the edge. And a combination of all those effects give rise to libration. Don't worry if you haven't grasped all that, because even Newton said when he thinks about the motion of the moon, it makes my head hurt. when he was talking in the context of tides. So definitely the complex motions of the moon can baffle people to begin with, but gradually, as you learn more about the moon, you begin to, especially Mare Crisium, like it was an article in Sky and Telescope many years ago that kind of spurred me on to try and watch the different changing aspects of Mare Crisium during the year. So every time it's first quarter moon or near first quarter moon, I look up and essentially see is Crisium in from the edge or close to the right edge. And it's extraordinary how it becomes just part of your kind of interest in amateur astronomy, like a simple observation, but yet you'll discover vibration for yourself by watching the changing aspect of that particular feature. But vibration also, essentially vibration allows us to see about 59% of the moon's surface. Obviously only 50% at any one time, but overall, by being able to see over the edge at different points, it allowed people map features that got occasional glimpses of. One of the most famous is Mare Orientale, the eastern sea, which is now on the western edge of the moon. It was named before NASA and the International Astronomical Union formally adopted east-west coordinate system on the moon. So pre-Apollo, east was east, but now east is west on the moon. So Mare Orientale, eastern sea, but it's on the western edge of the moon. Because obviously when astronauts were walking on the moon, they were so used to east and west on the Earth that if you flip directions for them, they'd be utterly confused. Not good if you're after driving in your lunar rover X number of kilometers away, and someone, your companion says, "Go east," and you go, "Really?" I don't think it's that way. But certainly, this is a feature that many observers try and observe because it's perfect bullseye on the moon, the impact that created it, and then you see the concentric mountain rings that are centered on that impact bullseye point. And we occasionally get good peaks of that area. About 2 years ago was the best opportunity. The opportunities occur about every 6 years or so. So 2027 is the next extreme libration. Now, that doesn't mean don't go looking for it every 6 years. Like, there's going to be other opportunities. You'll see part of those those rings of mountains, and even catch a glimpse of the floor of the mare, the bullseye at the center of the area itself. I think it's about 300 kilometers across or something like that. But it is a very intriguing area of the moon, and the beauty of this is that you can even capture this even just with a point and shoot digital camera. Okay, it doesn't show up very well there, but on the camera screen, you could see a certain raggedness to the edge there, which is where the mare is. This kind of dark floored crater is Rinaldi, and when that's quite far in from the edge, you know you have a good view of Mare Orientale. Then the top right shows a couple of seas on the eastern edge of the moon that sometimes are quite favorably placed. This is a picture that Paddy Morton tweeted. I added labels to it, but he got quite nice, a nice shot, again with a point and shoot digital camera, showing Mare Marginis and Mare Smithy, the two kind of long dark streaks there where favorable vibration allowed us to see those particular areas. Then another, not vibration, but so when the moon is waning, when it's gibbous a few days after full moon, the terminator line falls right across Mare Crisium, and it looks like a bite taken out of the moon. Many years ago, I was just looking at the moon through binoculars and said, "Hey, it looks like a mouse is nibbled on the lunar wheel of cheese," and it was really extraordinary. And again, just past full moon, I look out for those opportunities again with binoculars, and that was just with a point and shoot camera to get the terminator line right across Mare Crisium. Because the floor of the Mare is dark, it does give an impression that someone was taking a nick out of that corner of the moon. Okay, resources, we're coming towards the end. Where to start? Because there has been literally mountains and mountains of books written about the moon. You could literally fill a whole building with books about the moon. You can never have too many atlases of the moon because they all show different aspects of it. But some I brought along, for example, now what you will find occasionally in, of course, should I bring it now? Is the other thing. In Sky High magazine, for example, you'll find they occasionally publish a moon map, and this particular one has some of the Clair obscure features mentioned and what their whole longitude is and when they're best visible. A good moon map is this particular laminated one by Sky and Telescope magazine. You can get it in different orientations. This one is for binoculars, so turn it right way. So it's north at the top, but you can get one suitable for use with a telescope. And the fact that you can fold it, so just certain features, certain areas, it makes it handy to use at the scope. One thing about observing the moon is you don't need to get away from light pollution, because the moon is light pollution in a sense. So you can observe, you can use a torch at the eyepiece, okay, not a big LED, but certainly don't worry about taking out a torch to look at your charts, because you're not going to, because when you look at the eyepiece, I have a photo somewhere on the laptop where I did eyepiece projection of the moon onto a piece of card, and you can see the moon projected. And I remember Dave Lillis and Frank Ryan down in Limerick, they used Dave's 20-inch Dobsonian to project the moon onto a wall, and it's just an amazing photo. You just see it's like a photo of the moon projected onto the wall, and it really demonstrates how bright the moon is. Besides those maps, kind of the next book I'd recommend people is Moon Gazing by Tom Kerrs. It's published maybe 2 years ago. But the beauty of that particular book, which retails for about €11, is that it has a fantastic map of the moon forms the centerpiece of it. And moon gazing has, I think it's 16, it's broken the moon up into 16 sectors. And it has essentially a photo, it has, a kind of a digitized photo of the moon on one side, and then it has all the features labeled on the other side. And that alone makes the book an amazing value to pick up by Tom Kerrs. Tom has written a number of other books since. He's written one on the Northern Lights, all the history and how to observe and photograph them, which is very apt with the aurora after kicking off the last couple of nights. He also brought out a book on observing the solar system, and I think he has a fourth one, and I know there's one in the Collins stable coming out in May this year on observing the sun. So they've created a nice series of observer guides. Phillips previously, now this is the US edition, so it's under the imprint of Firefly books. But Phillips, besides producing a moon map of their own, they also have in the past produced a suite of books, one on the moon by Peter Bragle, who sadly passed away a number of years back. They have one on the deep sky, on stargazing with binoculars, observing the sun by Pam Spence. Neil Bone did one on Mars. So again, and they're much more detailed than the Collins ones, but these are out of print as far as I know, but you should stumble across them online secondhand easily enough. Then, of course, the great Antonin Ruckel, he produced a map of the moon that essentially became the basis for all subsequent publications that feature these maps. Will Tyrion told me before that essentially Antonin Ruckel produced one moon map, and all the Ruckel books you see since are the same map, but just shown in a different format. So Astronomy magazine produced an atlas of the moon, and then it was updated by Stein Telescope magazine, but it's out of print. And if you own a copy, you could put the kids through college on it. Well, at one stage, you could, because they were retailing for huge prices secondhand online.
Sorry to say, he died.
He did, yeah.
Last year.
Yeah, maybe last year or the year before.
So,
yeah, but no, I know Atlas of the Moon is being reprinted as a German edition through Auckland Verlag, but
can you spell the name, sorry? Can you spell the full name, please?
I have it, it might be there somewhere around.
So he thought to take the book out, he wasn't damaged to work.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, it's almost like he's German, yeah. Just
He's Czech. But but pre the Atlas of the Moon, the larger A4 size, he produced this book, Moon, Mars and Venus, in the 1970s. And I remember on cloudy nights, I was telling people about this, and suddenly there was a rush by observers to buy a copy because the main atlas had got so expensive, but this was still knocking about for $5. So there was basically a run in the market in buying them up. But they're smaller scale, but essentially the same maps as appear in these other atlas of the moon. When you mentioned was Rocco German, this is a German atlas of the moon, and it's my favorite atlas. It's a photographic atlas, and because the lunar crater names are in Latin, you don't have to worry about the translation on the other side. You can kind of make a good stab at it anyway, and Google Translate certainly helps. But like Dermond, Greece Atlas Mond is my favorite atlas at the moment. It's a photographic atlas of the moon. I'll pass it around there. Then Charles Wood, who I mentioned earlier, he writes a column every second month in Sky and Telescope magazine, and his book is called The Modern Moon. And that essentially complements Work's atlas. Like Modern Moon changed the way we looked at the moon, because many of the magazines would have just previously talked about a specific lunar feature, one crater. But Wood looked at the moon in the context of its geological history, and his articles are fantastic in giving you an overview of the history of the moon, putting what you see in context. And again, it's uses digitized photos plus real photos to show particular areas. If you come across Discover the Moon, this has lots of tours in it of, and there's another book you can get online if you Kindle Unlimited. Have a look for 50 Things You Can See on the Moon by John Reed. It's a fantastic book, and it essentially describes lots of interesting features you can see on the moon, and really is a lovely guide introducing you to lunar observing. But Discover the Moon is fantastic as well. It's lots of tours of various areas of the moon. And then in the last, I only bought one volume. This is a 3-volume set. I know Donica has a copy. Luna Cognita. It's absolutely astounding. Like, you know, the way kids watch these unboxing videos online of Lego sets or other stuff. I was watching unboxing videos of people unboxing Luna Cognita, because it was, by watching the YouTube video of unboxing this, you got a real idea of what the 3 volumes contained. Like the videos, like I think both videos I watched were about 16 minutes long, and the people that produced them like page through each volume and describe the contents, and it really is bringing together of all our knowledge about the moon for the observer, for the historian of the moon, for some, like the 3rd volume is basically an index and a list of sources to look for more information, but it is an extraordinary work, and one that you'd never read in a lifetime, but you can just admire it and go, yeah. But that's really, it really is a thing of beauty there. But this, if you want to take a photo of that, this is a website to get details of future lunar X and V opportunities. The next opportunity, now I think that might be from 2 years ago, that particular one, but if you Google for Mary McIntyre's vlog, it'll list future opportunities to see the lunar X. I think March 29th is the next evening. You can see the lunar X. So oh gosh, that's next month. Yeah, for some reason I thought we were still in January. But yeah, Sky at Night magazine, lots of articles there about not just observing the moon, but you'll also find the articles about Clair obscure effects. Google the astronomy magazine, Observe Shadow Play on the Moon. That's Phil Harrington's article. The moon.ie, wiki Clair obscure. Oh, that's your website. That's Donica's website, yes. Yeah, you have a list of effects there. Lunar Phase Pro, Gary Nugent in Churchtown. produced a fantastic piece of software for the Lunar Observer. Virtual Moon Atlas is a huge digitized map of the moon, but essentially is continually updated as new features are named. And then SVS, Goddard Space Flight Center, NASA.gov, is where you get the scientific visualization studio. It's a must to bookmark that website because it's, as I said, it's got a graphic for every hour of every day of every month of the year. And you can, many observers use it because it takes into account vibration effects. Like the graphics are extremely detailed in that sense, in that they're taking into account all the different changing aspects of the moon. And you can use that to determine future viewing opportunities. Like essentially, if you know the date of first quarter moon, just plug in that particular date and maybe like 7 p.m. in the evening and or 1900 hours and see is the X visible, and if not, just step it back and forward by an hour. You might discover that the X is only visible around midday, in which case we won't see it. Well, you will, but the moon will just be coming up around that time. So, thank you very much, everyone.